Hello, today I'll share with you a reflection or a thread of ancient thought that winds through astrology, the occult, and the forgotten language of breath. I'll take you through medieval halls of knowledge, touch the edge of mystical practice, and talk about how breath was once seen and understood as both spirit and spell. So I invite you, simply breathe with me. Set aside the rush of the world for the next 15 minutes and let us learn and descend quietly into the sacred rhythm that animates all things. In the beginning, there was breath, not word breath, because even the word was breathed before it was spoken. The stars had not yet formed, the earth was formless and void, but the spirit moved, not walking or flying, but breathing over the waters. Breath is the timeless echo of the divine, a subtle current that links flesh and cosmos. In medieval Europe, breath was the vital spirit, the pneuma or spiritus, the animating agent breathed into us by God. Now, medieval thinkers ingrained their understanding of breath in a synthesis of Aristotelian and Galenic medicine, transmitted and transformed through Arabic scholars. Aristotle conceived of the heart as the seat of a life-giving vapor or pneuma that enabled perception, movement, and generation. This Aristotelian foundation became very much embedded in medieval medical thought. Now, Galen elaborated this into a three-part model. Breath-inspired air merges with vital warmth in the heart, producing the vital spirits or pneuma, which then transform into psychic spirits carried by the arteries to the brain, where sensation, cognition, and movement spring forth. Ibn Sina or Avicenna, the medieval Persian polymath whose canon of medicine was foundational in European universities, refined the idea. He described three kinds of pneuma: vegetative, coming from the liver, vital from the heart, and animal or sensitive, forming in the brain. The vital breath was a divine emanation that animated body and soul alike. Now, the prevalence of these texts in medieval Europe, from translations circulating in Salerno, Toledo, Paris, Montpellier, Bologna, basically meant that the concept of breath as a spiritual physiological force was laced into scholastic medicine, philosophy, and theology. And while medieval occult traditions like astrology, alchemy, and Hermetic philosophy did not always mention breath openly, the concept of a world spirit, anima mundi, in Hermetic thought reflects the idea of breath as the universal life force. Breath or spiritus was alignment. To breathe consciously was to harmonize with the motion of the heavens. And in this way, the act of breathing became occult practice, or a form of communion. Hermeticism, rediscovered during the Renaissance but with medieval roots, saw the cosmos as a living organism imbued with a spiritual breath, and people like Paracelsus later called this the archeus, a vital force governing both macrocosm and microcosm, the inner alchemical fire that governed the body. Now, this archeus was a breath within the blood, a spiritual principle that animated and ordered the flesh, directed by the stars above. Now, I read this somewhere, but I'm not sure who said it. Man is a star bound to earth, and breath is the cord that ties him to the firmament. Western Christian contemplative practice usually avoided overt breathwork, unlike Eastern traditions, but there were strains where breath and prayer aligned, especially in 14th century Eastern Orthodox hesychasm, from the Greek hesychia, meaning quiet, silence, or stillness, where Eastern monks in the deserts of Mount Athos used breath-synchronized prayers to attain inner stillness. So it was a discipline of silence, repetition, and breath. And they instructed, let your mind descend into your heart and there remain. Now, even Western Christian mystical tradition, while distrusting mechanical techniques, still combined breath with speech and silence in prayer. And this was sort of an echo of how an altar breathes in quiet and sacred presence. In Kabbalah, the Sephirot Yesod represents the foundation of spiritual life and is connected to breath as the energy that links higher consciousness with the material world. Hermetic thinkers, like before mentioned Paracelsus, taught that the human life itself is a breath from the stars, and in this way saying or even emphasizing that our very existence is connected to cosmic rhythms. In astrology, the signs of the zodiac correspond to regions of the body. Aries the head, Taurus the throat, Gemini the breath and arms. So each breath we take is a movement through the zodiac, a passage through the celestial wheel embedded in our own form. So to inhale is to draw in Aries fire, and to exhale is to release into Piscean dissolution. The ancient astrologers spoke of the planets not just as bodies, but as celestial intelligences who breathe influence into the spheres below. And these influences were carried by the subtle airs, the etheric winds, the pneuma, permeating flesh and spirit alike. And so the magicians and philosophers of the Middle Ages did not separate the breath of man from the breath of the stars. To draw breath with intention was to attune oneself to the hidden music of the spheres. It was to enter into cosmic rhythm, to become part of a sacred conversation between body and sky, between soul and Saturn, and between lung and luminous order. In medieval philosophy, breath was the language of the inner world. The vital spirits, drawn from the heart, traveled on the breath to animate thought, sensation, and will. These spirits, spiritus vitalis, were the very substance of emotion, housed in the heart, refined in the brain, and carried by the breath. Hildegard of Bingen, the mystic abbess and visionary of the 12th century, wrote of the breath as the flatus animae, meaning the breath of the soul. She described how joy expanded the breath, making the soul luminous and wide, while grief constricted it, darkening the spirit. In her vision, the breath was a living flame capable of burning bright or being smothered by sorrow. From the writings of the scholastics to the romantic tales of courtly love, breath was always the sign of emotional truth. So a sigh was not weakness but an outflow of soul. To lose one's breath in awe, to gasp in terror, to pant in desire, these were expressions of the spiritus shaken. Even death was not just the heart's silence, but the spirit's exhalation. To breathe one's last was to release the soul through the mouth. The Latin term anima efflare, or to breathe out the soul, tells everything. To die was not to end, but to unbind, to exhale into the cosmos. So did joy manifest in the breath. Laughter was seen as divine madness, an overflow of vital spirits. Galen taught that laughter was the soul's expansion, a fire kindled in the chest. It shook the body not out of weakness, but from the strength of spirit unbound. In all things, breath was the mirror of the emotional body, the weather of the soul. In astrology and occultism, breath is usually seen as a symbol of life, spirit, and energy. And while planets and signs get most of the attention, fixed stars can also be connected to the theme of breath, though sometimes more symbolically than directly. So, for example, Aldebaran, the bright star in Taurus, in Persian cosmology known as the Watcher of the East. Aldebaran symbolizes vitality and the life force. Agrippa described the stars as instruments of the divine breath, moving through the sky to awaken life. So Aldebaran's rising before the sun in certain seasons can be seen as a kind of first breath, an awakening that energizes the earth and all living things. In Virgo, we find Spica, known as the ear of wheat or ear of grain. It is associated with spiritual nourishment and grace. Ptolemy connected Spica to Venus and Mercury, and partly Mars, linking it to blessings, kindness, communication, and refined spiritual gifts. Elena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, described Spica as representing the divine spark in man, which comes through inspiration, and this idea is closely related to being filled with spiritual breath. Then there is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky in Canis Major. In ancient Egypt, Sirius's heliacal rising marked the start of the Nile flood, a vital life-giving event. Alice Bailey, in her book A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, describes Sirius as the source of the breath of the cosmic logos, a spiritual force flowing into human consciousness. And in this context, breath is linked with renewal, awakening, and the flow of divine energy into the world. So in summary, fixed stars like Aldebaran, Spica, or Sirius have symbolic connections to breath through their mythological and esoteric meanings. Now, you might not think of breathing as anything more than a basic survival function, but in the context of psychic development, it plays a surprisingly important role. In yoga, breath control, what is called pranayama, is more than oxygen. It is seen as a way to regulate energy, attention, and even consciousness. Now, physical research doesn't offer much that's definitive, and traditional physiology doesn't go into the subtleties of breath beyond its mechanical function. But some observations are worth noting. So, for example, at any given moment, we tend to breathe primarily through one nostril, not both equally. And this alternates in a natural rhythm. Some studies suggest every couple of hours. Others say it can shift as often as every 30 minutes. And this cycle, known in yoga as the nasal cycle, is subtle, but it is measurable. Now, maybe more intriguing is the link between changes in breathing patterns and altered states of consciousness. Many trance-like states, whether meditative or otherwise, usually begin with a shift in the rhythm or depth of breath. And some historical figures, like Emanuel Swedenborg, believe their heightened awareness or psychic abilities were directly connected to changes in their breathing. In Hindu and yogic traditions, breath is thought to generate a kind of eternal force or prana, which is believed to counteract gravity in certain extreme states, such as levitation. Now, whether or not you believe that's literally possible, it points to the larger idea that breath is more than air, it is energy, and there are a few distinct breathing techniques yogis use. One involves completely emptying the lungs and holding that emptiness. Another focuses on fully filling the lungs and maintaining that state. A third technique involves simply holding the breath at whatever level it is at without forcing anything in or out. But there are, of course, more techniques. So what's the goal behind these practices? Well, mostly to still the mind. By regulating the breath, it becomes possible to slow down mental activity. And when thought quiets down, some traditions believe it conserves vital energy that might otherwise be used up by constant mental chatter. So while science may still have something to explore in this area, it is clear that breath, something we do 20,000 times a day without thinking, could be one of the most direct tools we have for accessing deeper layers of consciousness. In astrology, the respiratory system, the lungs, the airways, the simple act of inhaling and exhaling is governed by the signs of Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer. The Taurus anchors the breath in the body, giving it form and rhythm. Gemini, mutable and airy, rules the motion of breath. And Cancer carries the emotional undercurrent of breathing, how we hold, release, or suppress the breath in response to feeling. At the planetary level, Mercury is the primary ruler of respiration. In both traditional astrology and physiological occult anatomy, Mercury governs the nervous system and the respiratory function. It coordinates the brain's commands with the breath's rhythm, so every inhale, every exhale is directed by Mercury's subtle intelligence. But the breath is not merely mechanical, as Jupiter, the great expander, rules breath in the astral body, that subtle energetic field beyond the physical. So where Mercury transmits, Jupiter amplifies. Breath becomes prana, chi, life force, drawn in not just from air, but from the surrounding cosmos. Neptune and Uranus, when placed in Taurus, Gemini, or Cancer, expand this relationship to breath. Neptune dissolves boundaries, so through breath we merge with the unseen. Uranus electrifies it, ruling the spontaneous, involuntary nature of breathing and the nervous responses linked to it. It governs the sudden gasp, the awakening breath, that inhale during altered states of consciousness. To understand the breath through astrology is to realize it is not only a bodily function, but a sort of spiritual compass. Each breath aligns us with the movements of the stars, the intelligences of the planets, and the quiet vibrating order of the universe. And so we begin to see that breath is not just an involuntary act. It is a whole practice, a science, and a rite. So in the esoteric traditions of the East, this life force carried on the breath is called prana, as we already heard. In Chinese philosophy, it is qi. In the Western occult mysteries, it is known as the vital ether or the astral breath. It flows through the lungs, but also through the nadis, meridians, and subtle currents of the energetic body. So through conscious breath work, whether in yogic pranayama, hermetic breathing techniques, or meditative stillness, we become alchemists of air. We regulate the body's oxygen and carbon dioxide, but also the flow of psychic energy, emotion, and even karma. When we inhale deeply and with awareness, we draw in more than air. We invite clarity, invoke presence, and channel the rhythm of the universe. Also, astrologically, the quality of the breath and our ability to work with it can be influenced by planetary transits. When Mercury retrogrades, especially through Gemini or air signs, we may find breath being shallow, scattered, or anxious, the nervous system overstimulated, the mind racing, and this is a time to slow down and return to conscious breathing. This is sort of an invitation to tune inward, and it will not be the same for all zodiac signs. A Neptune transit, mostly when forming aspects to Mercury or the Moon, may dissolve our normal breathing patterns, drawing us into altered states, dreamlike or foggy. And here breath becomes the anchor, that thread that holds consciousness together. Under the influence of Jupiter, breath expands. We may feel drawn to breath work, to deeper spiritual practices, or simply to more space in the lungs and the psyche. Now, Jupiter in Gemini or Aquarius is especially potent for expanding our awareness through air, through mantra, voice, or through the act of breathing with intent. Uranus, the awakener, can bring sudden shifts, the gasp of realization, the breath that shocks us into new awareness. Transits from Uranus can activate spontaneous changes in breath patterns, sometimes linked to anxiety, but also to breakthrough. In truth, breath is our most accessible tool of transformation. It is available in every moment, responsive to thought, emotion, and the movements of the heavens. To master the breath is to step into conscious co-creation with the universe. It is to move from automatic existence to intentional embodiment, to breathe, not just to live, but to awaken. And so we return to the breath, the first motion of life and the last. Each inhale is a return, each exhale a letting go. Through the breath, we participate in the eternal rhythm of creation and dissolution, just as the planets orbit, or as the tides rise and fall, or just as the soul moves between realms. To breathe consciously is to remember this truth. So breathe, not just to survive, but to awaken, to align, and to attune. Let the stars guide your lungs, let Mercury move your breath, let Jupiter fill it with meaning, and let Uranus awaken the forgotten knowledge carried within every cell. Because the breath, in the end, is not ours alone. It is the breath of the universe breathing through us. And when we breathe with awareness, we return to our origin. We return to the stars. Thank you for being here today, for watching, listening, breathing, and remembering. I hope you'll return next week as we continue to follow these ancient threads, whether they lead through the signs in the stars, the symbols in the body, or the secrets whispered in forgotten texts. Until then, keep breathing with intention. The universe might be paying attention. And if you feel called to explore more, I'll be right here. See you next week. Bye.